Okay, everyone, great to have you alongside meteorologist Jeff Porter, meteorologist Will Haenni, meteorologist Randy Burns. We are here for this particular edition of our podcast to focus on what the weather is going to look like as we head into the spring and the spring months, but particularly with a focus on precipitation and our flood concerns. And this has been a story you guys know intimately well that essentially we have been following on a week by week, month by month basis for
feels like since last spring.
yeah
Yeah, it has.
like a long time now. And if you're in a low-lying area, if you live next to the lake or if you live next to a river, you're like intimately concerned about what is ahead of us as we start to melt our snow and transition into warmer times. So I think really the first place to start is National Weather Service out of Grand Rapids. They put together this hydrologic outlook every couple of weeks. This particular one came out just about a week ago, and then the next one will be out in about another week or so. But essentially what the takeaway is the flood risk is higher than normal. Now there's like a billion reasons, but I think, Will, really that place to start is with Lake Michigan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I think rooted in the fact that Lake Michigan's water table is so high, but then an extension of that is that our soil is so saturated. So when you have a really really high water table in Lake Michigan, the way that hydrologists have explained it to me and the way I explain it to people, it's kind of like everything is flowing into Lake Michigan in this part of the region, right? All of our rivers, the streams that flow into our main river basins, it's all going to the lake eventually, right? So if your lake is really high, things kind of get backed up a little bit and the soil becomes a lot more saturated. And in this report from the National Weather Service, they talk mostly just about the fact that our ground is so saturated in water, it's basically like a sponge. It can't absorb any additional rain, or at least much right now. And so when we get a significant 1-2 inch rainfall event, which become more common as we get into the spring, the concern is ground is so saturated, can't absorb that, so then that extra runoff is just going to go right into the rivers. And again, it all kind of ties into, again, the fact that we have a record high Lake Michigan water table right now, or Michigan-Huron, I guess I should say, and that expected to just continue to rise even as we get into the spring.
And I know you've been following this for a while, but I mean, how far are we above what's typical or normal? Like as far as Lake Michigan goes, I know you have a good sense for that.
Yeah, so right now, the difference in water level from even this time last year on Lake Michigan-Huron, we're up 17 inches, and this is as of February 14th. So if you thought last year was high, we're up 17 inches compared to last year. As I look at this, I believe we're 49 inches above average in terms of the average for February 14th, which is just pretty remarkable.
That's crazy.
Fortunately, when I'm looking at the numbers I have, this month compared to last month, our water level hasn't risen more than an inch. It is expected, though, to rise an additional, I think, 8 inches between now and July. And so, again, we've been reporting on this. I talked to Kate Hosier, Assistant City Manager in South Haven last week. We've been interviewing her a lot. Our team has.
Sure.
Just because of the implications in places like South Haven or in places like Grand Haven where we're already seeing less and less beach. If we see an additional 8-inch rise, for example, Kate Hosier was talking about, they might not be able to open their marinas because the water is so close to the docks right now. So that's kind of another tangent. But again, it just speaks to the fact that we are seeing some pretty remarkable conditions right now.
And I know you have a lot of good numbers, and we're going to get to your numbers in a second, but just think for the viewers and our friends and our neighbors that live right butt up against Lake Michigan. If you're already, what essentially is you're saying, Will, 1.5 feet above where we typically are for our lake level, then let's say you have a high wind or a high wave event,
right,
maybe married with a high precipitation event, all that stuff compounds. If you're talking about, waves 3 to 6 feet, 4 to 8 feet, on top of, this surplus that we already have. But any other good nuggets in there as far as Lake Michigan goes? Anything stand out otherwise?
Just the fact that we're going to continue to, I think, see record levels in the next several months, the record highest we've likely ever seen. That the thing, it's the most likely scenario, right? So that's based off of a lot of different data that the Army Corps of Engineers utilizes, hydrologists there, and then National Weather Service, I think, is involved in that process as well. So yeah, it's just the fact that it's so much above average, several feet above where we typically are this time of year.
And I think if you were to talk to, and we're going to get to you in like 10 seconds, but I think if you talk to the hydrologist out of the Grand Rapids National Weather Service, and he is fantastic, by the way.
He's great, yeah. Andrew Dixon.
Yes, Andrew. And I think he essentially said, like, this is a problem that took about 5 to 10 years to arrive upon.
And it'll take about 5 to 10 years to correct.
So give us some of the numbers that you have, because that also really speaks to and builds off of what Will was saying.
Yes, and I know a lot of people also, we have above average precipitation in this hydrologic outlook from the National Weather Service. They did mention it was the wettest fall on record in many locations for West Michigan, and we continued that into December and January. We saw over 2.5 inches in December. Usually we see under 2 inches of rain for that month. Most of the time it is in the form of snow. And in January we saw again over 2 inches of rain, and usually it's around 1.8 inches of rain that we see for that month. So we're continuing that into this year as well. So 2019 actually ended being one of the wettest years on record for cities like Grand Rapids, Muskegon as well. The National Centers for Environmental Information released a map of 2019 precipitation ranks, and Michigan, of course, we had one of our wettest years to rank, but also Wisconsin did too. And you got to think, it's not just our water going into Lake Michigan. Sure. We also have the bordering states like Indiana, Illinois, as well as Wisconsin. So if they're also seeing their wettest record, or wettest year on record, that's also funneling into Lake Michigan-Huron that we're dealing with. So that's also going to see, or give us that reason as to why we're seeing above average lake levels. So it's not just us who are seeing the crazy amount of rain adding into it, it's also the other states surrounding these lakes as well. So that's something to keep in mind also, that we're continuing to see this wet pattern, and it looks like that's going to continue as well.
Now, Jeff, you were kind of looking at each individual river, and the National Weather Service goes into a lot of detail about the specifics of which rivers are most at risk. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so, if you live in Newaygo County, this is all about you, because it is the Muskegon River at essentially, 3 different stressor points. So we'll just look at those locations and then just kind of roll you forward. So the Muskegon River at Bridgeton, here's what's important to remember. Flood stage is 13 feet. We already are modeling at an 80% chance to meet flood stage. This would take us through the next couple of months. We have a 60% chance to exceed flood stage by a foot. So we're talking river level 14 feet, Muskegon River at Bridgeton, higher than 50%. Is high confidence, in this regard. So we're going to stay along the river, change our position a little bit. Muskegon River at Newaygo, flood stage for this particular juncture, 11 feet, 80% odds that or 80% chances that we meet flood stage, 50% chances that we exceed it by a foot. Again, quick math, that would get us to 12 feet. Also along the Muskegon River, this is now Croton Dam. This is a place that we regularly see, river flood warnings for. Flood stage 9 feet, 60% chance to meet flood stage, 30% likelihood to exceed it by a foot. Now, the other point along our river system that we're worried about is St. Joe County. Now, it wasn't that long ago that St. Joseph River at Three Rivers had its own issues. What was that, maybe 2 months ago-ish?
Less than that, maybe a month and a half.
Yeah.
So right now we're about a foot below flood stage. Flood stage is 7 feet. If you're in St. Joseph County and you're close to Three Rivers, you are intimately aware of this. You've got 60% chances here to meet flood stage, a 25% chance to exceed it by a foot, which would get us to 8 feet. And those are just a couple examples. I mean, you could look in every county and look at the local rivers and kind of make a similar argument. So we're worried about the Muskegon River. Why are we a little bit more worried about that than maybe the St. Joseph River? Well, they got more snow on the ground.
Right.
Than we do in this part of West Michigan. So that's sort of a pre-existing factor that we'll continue to watch. It's like, how quickly do we lose our snowpack? Is it a slow process, or is it something that ends up being gradual?
And they talk about that in this report. That's the biggest driver of like potential concern in the springtime in this region. Like the worst possible thing we could have would be like maybe in the next few weeks we get a little bit of additional snowpack, but then the worst possible thing that could happen would be like a really big warm up with prolonged warmth, with all that snow melting, and then if we had some heavy precipitation added onto that, that would be worst case scenario, because not only again do you add the snow melt concerns, but then you have additional precip on top of that.
And we are about to go into the month where we see most of our snow starting to melt. I talked to Andrew Dixon, the hydrologist with the National Weather Service, probably a month ago when we were dealing with a lot of flood warnings. And he did say March is kind of that time of year where we're starting to see our snow melt. We're starting to see that add to the rivers, which is, again, right around springtime. So this is right when we're starting to see whether or not we're going to get a big warm-up or we're going to do it gradually like we need to.
Yeah.
And I would think just the fact that our snowfall has been below average doesn't hurt the situation.
No, it doesn't.
Right? I mean, go ahead.
No, I was going to say exactly. They talk about that a little bit. We were seeing a below average snowpack south of I-96 essentially,
Yeah.
but up towards Muskegon, up towards Newaygo County, it's actually near normal. And so that's part of just one of the reasons why the concern of river flooding is a little bit elevated farther north. But there's, again, like you said, a billion other reasons it seems.
There are wild cards. There's no doubt about it. I mean, if you want to run the numbers for a moment, I'm just going to pull these off the top of my head, but a little bit over 36 inches in Kalamazoo on the season. You know,
Snow, yeah.
That's snow. We traditionally average about 70. Hastings comes in at about 44 inches-ish, you know, out of Berry County, and then Grand Rapids comes in, you know, right around about 46.2, and then includes the heavy wet snow that we saw, you know, Monday night into very early Tuesday. So, you know, what's typical for Grand Rapids, about 75 inches on a given winter. So you start to do the math here and you say, all right, are we going to get like 30 more inches of snow between now and... Now, I know last year we had snow at the very end of April.
We did.
Which is kind of wild. So let's just say that doesn't happen. Are we going to get 30 more inches of snow between now and early April?
Highly unlikely.
I was going to say, usually our second highest month for snow is February. And, I mean, it hasn't been too impressive this month.
Yeah. In order to catch up to the season totals, we would have to have, like, some unprecedented March and Aprils in order to do that.
We would need like a couple of monster storms, really, I think, to make up lost ground.
That being said, we have still, at least last month, we were above average in terms of liquid equivalent precipitation. So while we've had less snow, as you know, last month we had, I think, it was either one or two events that was over an inch of precipitation in terms of rainfall. So that's the kicker there is, we've been below average in terms of snow, and that might help now because we have less of a snowpack, but that's not to say we haven't been wet. And so that's, again, it's just been a never-ending saga, it seems.
And like, as you said, and echoing what Andrew Dixon said, like, it's not like this is going to go away this summer.
No.
Or, you know, 2021. Like, we need to continue to be vigilant. We need to continue to talk about this and be aware, because it's not like a light switch. It's not just going to go away.
Yeah, and if you're thinking, too, I don't live along a river, like, how does this affect me? Well, when the rivers are flooded, I mean, it's just, everything, I was talking about this at the beginning, like, everything backs up.
It's a trickle-down effect.
Yeah, I know, pun intended, right?
Yeah.
It is, 100%. So when your rivers are backed up, the streams, creeks can get backed up, which can be, you know, flash flood concerns. When those are backed up, then we have the concern of flash flooding and a lot of other, you know, more widespread issues. So.
And even if you're watching us or listening to us, and we're extremely grateful that you are, and let's say you have like lake property, and you're on one of our inland lakes that continues to suffer from abnormally high levels. We're looking at you at Crooked Lake. We're looking at you at Eagle Lake. This is stuff you need to be concerned about also.
Yeah, it's not good news. I mean, this is the thing is things are not getting better right now, it seems, and that things are not forecast to get better. They're forecast to get worse, if anything. The best forecasts that we have, and that the National Weather Service, the Army Corps of Engineers have, it's not getting better. That's what's not good news.
I think we do have a little bit of good news here in this ongoing story, and it probably has two chapters to it, or two legs to it. I think one is the fact that our frost depth is nowhere near
Right.
where it normally
Yeah.
is. This report specifically says, around the Grand and Muskegon River bases, about 2 to 4 inches worth of a frost depth, which is less than what is typical or what could be. So what you're talking about is, instead of that ice acting as a barrier, there's a somewhat better chance to get that absorption to come into play versus where we might have been maybe come this time last year,
Yeah.
or colder winters in the past. I think the other piece of good news here is, and we did have a little bit of this about 3 weeks ago along the Kalamazoo River at Comstock, because we had an ice jam,
Right.
right? But mostly, there's not a lot of ice on our rivers.
No.
We'd have to have a pretty significant cold snap in order to see some of that ice formation. And that's good. If we had a lot of ice,
Yeah.
that creates a whole separate load of concerns, because then
Yeah.
you're worried about rapid fluctuations and a
Yes.
whole host of other things. We saw more ice jams last year,
Yeah.
and that was largely, I think, due to that significant cold we saw at the end of January
January,
into February.
early February.
Yeah, the polar vortex, if you will, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
that really was the initiator for all the issues that you saw with your
Yeah.
own eyes in Portland.
Yeah, that was crazy. That was the first time I'd ever, growing up in St. Louis, we never really had ice. I mean, it's possible, but they're a lot more rare down there.
Yeah.
And so that was my first ever time seeing one like up close and personal. It was crazy, but
There are some other nuggets in here. We do want to wrap up with a look ahead, but are we missing something? Am I missing something? Is there something we haven't covered? What do you think?
One thing I starred in here that I just thought was crazy, and this is cycling back to some of the river stuff, but they write in this report the amount of water that has flowed through the system in the last 4 months has surpassed the volume of water that typically passes through an entire year.
Oh.
So they're talking about the Grand and Muskegon River basins
Yeah.
there. So what they're saying is, in the last 4 months, the amount of water that has flowed through those rivers is typically what we see in an entire year. So that just speaks to, again, how significant the amount of water that's in our basins right now in terms of the soil saturation, in terms of some of the other streams. It's really, really high. I mean, that was crazy to me.
It's hard really to wrap your brain around it.
It is.
But it also tells you that it wouldn't take a lot of high volume, high precipitation events to quickly switch us into a situation where we have problems. And,
Yeah.
So did you see anything else, or from your research, the people you've interviewed, that stands up to you as we move forward?
There's one thing with talking to Andrew Dixon with the National Weather Service. He did say there is kind of a upside to the fact that we are seeing the rain. It is already working its way through the rivers. So that is something that's good, especially getting ahead of the time where we're looking at snow starting to melt in the next month or so. So most of that rain that has fallen for December, January, not so much for February, that is already started to work its way through the rivers. So that is good news there. Still, it's going to be adding to Lake Michigan's water levels, so that's unfortunate there, but it'll get its way out of our rivers, which is really kind of what we need ahead of that snow melting. So there is that good news with the fact that it has been rather mild of a winter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you want to sort of button up this sort of look ahead now? We're looking into March, we're looking into April. Climate Prediction Center is going to release some of their latest thoughts, we think, within a couple of days here.
Yeah.
You were looking at sort of some of the leading indicators moving beyond February. What did you see?
Yeah, their 10-day outlook and just some of the stuff I was looking at, it shows a slight trend towards below average temperatures, which you factor in, our average high this time of year is like mid to upper 30s, and then our average low is right around 20, right, I think?
Yes, sir.
So, just keep that in mind. But it shows a signal towards below average towards the end of this month and into early March. It also shows a slight trend towards above average precipitation.
Wetter than normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not the strongest signal ever. It's like when we're talking increased likelihood, we're talking like a 30-40% higher leaning towards above average precip and below average temperatures. But that was just one thing I noted. But like you said, Jeff, we should get a much more complete and much more extensive look ahead at March, April, May, which is meteorological spring here coming up very, very soon.
I think the takeaway from this report, which by the way is fantastic, and again, Grand Rapids National Weather Service, all the Mets there are really sharp. They've got another one of these coming out in about a week or so. But I think the takeaway here is every interested party, they underscore this, needs to pay attention to this for the next essentially 8 weeks.
Yeah.
So
It's prime time.
right? I mean, we're going to be doing that. Obviously, it's our job. But again, if you're next to the lake, you're next to the inland lake, if you're a normally flood-prone area, if you're next to a river, or even just a feeder that goes into a bigger river, we're talking about you.
Yeah.
You know, so. And I think you laid this out super well at the top, and I think this is a great way to finish it. These are the last things we want. We don't want like a huge snowstorm to come, or huge snowstorms to come, then a rapid warm up, followed by like a heavy rain event or events.
Yeah.
Like as long as we stay away from maybe like 2 out of 3 of those things, or 3 out of 4 of those things, like that would get us, get us along a little
bit. We need
bit.
sunshine and we need plenty of dry time, and warmer temperatures wouldn't hurt if we didn't see a bunch of exactly. But anyways, there's a lot of things we're wishing for to help alleviate some of these problems. But.
Yeah, and I just think we're very grateful to our faithful viewers and listeners, and I would just say to stay with us, and we'll get you through it. You know.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you all next time.